Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Asking for More podcast. Today, I get to interview Reva Patwardhan. She is the founder of Greater Good Coaching. She supports nonprofit leaders who are not having the impact they want and feel overwhelmed or like an imposter. She helps build confidence, innovate, and collaborate on the biggest challenges so they can make an impact. She has 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector as a fundraiser, communications director, lobbyist, board member, facilitator, coach, and diversity trainer. Oh my gosh, so many things. Reva co-facilitates small experiential learning groups with Stanford Graduate School of Business. She chairs the board of directors at Rethink Media. She's a certified integral coach and a member of the International Coaching Federation. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I love it. So tell me, if you please, I know we're both going to be speaking at the M&A Gather conference next week. And what are you going to be talking about there?
So I'm going to be talking about how imposter syndrome impacts organizations and why it is something that nonprofit leaders should pay attention to and would benefit from learning how to navigate.
Mm-hmm. It seems like I keep hearing that phrase more and more from different numbers of my friends, and I'm wondering if you could just give us like kind of an example of what is imposter syndrome.
Yeah, so most of the time people think of imposter syndrome as just something that happens inside your head, right? So it can feel like feeling small or intimidated by the people around you. You don't feel like you quite belong. You may obviously you feel like an imposter. So like if you are an imposter, then it's part of your job is making sure no one figures that out. So there's this extra mental load that is happening and emotional load that is happening for people who are experiencing it. That is what the individual feels like when they have imposter syndrome. And one of the things that I've been noticing in my work as a coach with nonprofit leaders is that what often gets missed by the person experiencing the imposter syndrome, as well as by the organization in general, is that a lot of times people feel anxious and intimidated and all of that for valid reasons that are organizational challenges and not individual challenges. So
I really
that's
am glad you brought that up, actually. Because as we've been seeing over like the last 2.5 years of the pandemic, people have been like saying, hey, working from home feels less stressful than working in the office. Why is that? Oh, because we have all these different systems of oppression at the office that are affecting us. Um,
mhm.
so you already covered kind of what imposter syndrome feels like. Why do some people have it?
Well, some people have it because I will say maybe it's a self-selecting group of people, but I'm often amazed by who does have it. It
Mm.
is often not who you would think. It's often someone who, like, I have clients who are very accomplished, very ambitious. They have done big things. They have founded organizations, raised lots and lots of money, people who seem at the top of their game. And then you talk to them and it turns out, oh, this person has imposter syndrome. How can that possibly be? so
Yeah.
it's really kind of wild that how very common it is. Having said that, I have met one or two people that seem to not who seem preternaturally confident. They're awesome, amazing people, and they feel very settled in themselves, and that's awesome. So that can also be a thing that is great to hear that exists in the world. But there are. So I think some of it is just, you know, temperament, and some of it is also environment and systems, right? So if you are different or you look different, you feel different, you have some sort of difference you're carrying around with yourself that is a non-dominant difference. So meaning you are not white, you are not male, you are not neurotypical, you are like all of those things. You are not straight, and you don't see examples of people being fabulous who look like you, or people who are being celebrated who look like you. That can be a big reason why people have imposter syndrome. If you walk into a room and it seems that everyone with influence in the room is somebody who does not share any of your identities, someone whose life experience you can't relate to, that can be an environmental reason for having imposter syndrome. I think the nonprofit sector is, I think the nonprofit sector has some larger historical dynamics going on that also breed imposter syndrome in people who maybe would not necessarily have it. I've had clients who have never experienced imposter syndrome except until they got into this one organization that they're in, and all of a sudden they feel completely incompetent, right? And so what that often looks like in the nonprofit sector is the expectations that you must be, that the expectation of being superhuman, that one must be incredibly resourceful and get all the stuff done with a minimum of time and overhead and cost and all of that, and that you'll be able to do all of these different things, and you don't need to have time to learn your new job. You're just going to dive in and you're just going to sink or swim and you're going to do it. So there's this whole history in the nonprofit sector of people doing things for very little pay, for no pay, that's normal. The person who held the job before you did it. Why can't I do it? That is a real breeding ground for imposter syndrome. Very long answer to your question.
No, that's wonderful, because that really leads me into, the name of this podcast is Asking for More. And I really feel like you've named a lot of different things that help us understand why we're not doing that. And if you have an imposter syndrome, that's part of it. But you also kind of touched on different aspects of white supremacy in your answer. And I think it's really important to discuss that too. It's like white supremacy is about perfectionism, urgency, individualism, like all the things that are named in dismantlingracism.org as things that we can work on in organizational cultures, because we're built on white supremacy, like our whole culture is. So it's like we're swimming through this water all the time, we just don't notice it. So of course the nonprofit sector is also built on that. But then there's this nice added little layer of like Puritanism, guilt, Christianity, all these things that are like, nice juicy sandwich of shame and fear and, don't want to look at this stuff. Don't want to eat that sandwich anymore. Doesn't taste good. So like, yeah, so I love that you brought up all these different things that are really part of a larger structural thing. And I feel like the challenge that we're coming up against now in the nonprofit sector is having a crisis of ethics. Like how do we say that we want Black Lives to Matter? How do we say that we want, equity in the workplace for racial equity, gender parity, pay, all that stuff, and yet still have, 90% of the biggest organizations are snow-capped, white male, stale, pale, and male, right? And then like, even if they're led by a white woman, that's not really that much better, to be honest. So like, let's talk about, how can organizations help people not feel imposter syndrome? Like, we know that we have to change the structures. Celebration is one aspect you mentioned, but what are some other things people can do?
So I actually think that the goal is not to have people not feel imposter syndrome, because I think that that particular experience is it's a natural thing that a lot of people feel. It's kind of a bummer part of the human experience. I think what I would like us to see us working on is how to name it as something that is not just about that individual. Because what happens is when you're feeling like an imposter, the instinct is, and I need to keep everyone from finding this out. And then there's other instincts, like there's a tendency to internalize blame for things that are not your fault. If you feel like a fraud and you're more likely to blame yourself for not being able to keep up with a workload that is, that is genuinely a difficult workload for someone who maybe is new on their job, for someone who's still learning, or maybe it's just would be impossible for anybody, right? And rather than being able to name that and externalize the problem, there's a tendency to internalize it. So the first step in addressing all of that is to just name that imposter syndrome happens. It is not a problem inside you that we need to fix. Because I think when we don't look at the fuller picture, that's what happens. It's like, oh, you have imposter syndrome. You need to go fix that, right? You just need to be more confident. If you just had more confidence, then you would be able to do X, Y, and Z. That's your main issue, right? And I think a lot of times when people come in my first session with a client, that's often the framework they're coming with is if I just could get over myself, then X, Y, Z, then I would be able to do all these things. And it's like, well, actually, I think you're having a normal reaction. A lot of time, I think you're having a normal, valid, you're having normal, your emotions are valid. You are having an experience that is a common, normal experience people have. And wouldn't it be great if we could just talk about it and name it? Wouldn't it be great if we could say, you know what, I'm not feeling confident in my ability to execute on this plan, and just to talk about that, right? So I guess one way to think about it is there are often times where it makes sense that you don't feel confident, but that doesn't make you a fraud, right? But it doesn't really help to blame the syndrome, right? Or to blame or to make that the problem, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100% that makes sense. And, if I can just give this some historical context again, just for a second, there's a book called Work Won't Love You Back by Sarah Jaffe. There's another book by Peter Fleming called The Worst Is Yet to Come. And he also wrote a book called Resisting Work. And in his Resisting Work book, he talked about how over the last 40 years, since the 80s, essentially, what we've done is we've basically taken big structural and societal problems and then individualized them and said, well, this person has a problem. Like you see this in the way that we talk about homelessness. This person was irresponsible, or this person has mental illness, therefore they deserve to be homeless, things like that. And honestly, when you see a homeless person, it's the failure of a system. It's not the failure of the individual. So again, HR, departments were created almost to like fight unions and organizations. And now that we're seeing a rise of unions, I feel like we also need to be talking about how people are pushing the blame for poor systems, poor management, but also just systems that were never set up to help us succeed, onto an individual and making that part of your shame and blame game for yourself. And like that works out great for them. They can sell you more products, they can, pay you less, right? So I completely agree with you. It really shouldn't be about the organization saying to the individual, you're the problem because you have imposter syndrome. It's really like, let's contextualize this, and that can take some of the shame away. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes. And then what becomes possible is we can work together to solve these problems. Mm-hmm. And it may be a long, arduous process. It may take a long time to address the issue. If it's something like, it can be something as entrenched as like, we have a 10-year grant that we've agreed to do this ridiculous amount of things for this tiny little bit of money. It can be entrenched major issues, but the starting point is, let's not pretend this was reasonable. Let's stop doing that. It's not reasonable because obviously people are falling apart and they're not able to do it. And therefore, by definition, it is not a really reasonable expectation. So let's just start talking about that. And even if it's going to be a hard, 5 more years or whatever, while we work this out, we can stop internalizing the blame.
Yes. I really appreciate you saying that. And I feel like that's worth repeating. We need to stop internalizing the blame for unrealistic expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Even if it was our own unrealistic expectations that we planned
out. Yeah. I mean, I get it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go
better.
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, we can always take steps to make things better and recognize when something's not working.
Hmm. That's so true. Like we have infinite resources available to us. We have infinite systems that we could create if we were rested enough. We don't have to keep doing a nonprofit system that's based in puritanism, that's based in shame, that's based in fear, that's based in lack, that's based in power over and dominance. You know, we could actually have a better system. We could have a better world if we are brave enough to name these problems.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful to you for naming this particular one. And you know, for someone who's listening right now who's experiencing imposter syndrome, what would you say to them? Like, how could they ask for more despite imposter syndrome?
Hmm. So, how can they ask for more in spite of imposter syndrome? I think it can start by naming the feeling,
Mhm.
right? And checking out if there's a way to do that without criticizing yourself,
Mm,
right? So, what is it you're feeling, right? And are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling doubtful? Are you feeling angry, hurt? What is the feeling? Because a lot of times that feeling is going to guide you to some kind of deeper truth about what you're noticing, what you're experiencing, so that you might name that and say it out loud. Find a way to say it out loud in a way that doesn't diminish you, that doesn't blame, all of that stuff. And invite collaboration, ask for help, ask for resources. And when I say, I think a lot of times when people do that exercise and start out doing that exercise, when they're trying to name the feeling, it can be, I think a lot of people are not used to naming emotions in a neutral way. Right. And so that's why it can be helpful to have support in some shape or form. Right. So naming emotion, it can be like an implication that there's a problem with me that I feel this way. Like I feel um, like I'm I'm feeling insecure about taking up too much space. Right. Or I'm I'm struggling to come up with a good example of this, but I'll just say it's something I see a lot. And it can become, and the shame, that's the thing about shame, is it can make it hard to locate your feelings.
mhm,
And so I think in that instance, if that's what if you're having a hard time really landing on a process of naming the feeling and finding the meaning behind it, you might then ask yourself, well, where is the shame? Is there shame in here? And just check that out. Is there something I'm ashamed of? Am I ashamed of the fact that I'm anxious? Am I ashamed of the fact that I feel doubtful? Am I ashamed of the fact that I feel insecure? And if you can kind of separate out the feeling of shame from the other feeling that you're feeling,
mhm.
that can be helpful.
I really, really, really appreciate you articulating that. I think a lot of what happens in our society is that feeling a feeling is shamed. Like full stop, and we try to not feel. And a lot of us are overworking to not feel.
Yes.
And it's very rewarded in our society to do that. Um, so I love that you begin with the feelings. I think that's bell hooks would agree. Very powerful. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. I actually I encourage people who are listening, maybe we can like have a link as well at the bottom of the show notes, people to find the wheel of feelings that's available online. I made it into like giant magnets and I gave them out to my friends and family. And I was like, now you can name your feelings. Here's a
Yes.
little tool. It's always going to be on your fridge and you can point to it and say, oh, that. And in the beginning, you might just know, I feel mad or sad or happy. And then it gets into greater and greater nuances. Or I feel anxious or I feel lonely. Or, you can start to get really granular with your feelings. But you first have to stop shutting yourself down when you feel.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Just being able to name that can often lead you to, well, what's happening? What it can lead you to either there's something I'm needing or there's something happening in the room that I'm assessing, and it would help me to just name that. Like, I'm feeling anxious. Well, what's happening there? What's making me feel anxious? Well, there's somebody in the room that I don't totally trust, and it's because of what they said yesterday. Right. But if you and that's good information. Those are your instincts, right? That's good information that can guide you towards your next steps. It doesn't mean you have to stay stuck in anxiety. It actually can be very empowering to just be able to say, I'm feeling anxious, and that is not a problem with me. It is something that I can take in and do something about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so true. And I feel like if we're going to survive this time with multiple competing crises of, a crumbling medical system, COVID-19 still running around crazy, um, climate crisis, you know, etc. We need to be able to name our feelings and the people around us so that there's space for us to just let the feeling be there rather than moving on quickly to the next thing. And I think that a lot of grant proposals and nonprofits are set up for people to really just kind of like name the problem and quickly move to doing. You really just need to feel first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the feeling is information. I mean, it's not, it's subjective, it's subjective information, and you can treat it as subjective information. It's not, it's, but it's still information, and it's information about you, right?
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yeah. You mentioned shame a little bit, and I wondered if we could talk about that a little bit. Um,
sure.
like, you know, you also mentioned representation and how important that is. And I feel like a lot of um, white-led organizations don't really understand that. Who gets celebrated, who gets the decision making, all that stuff.
Mhm.
So, you know, I wonder, how is that related to shame? Do people feel more shame because they don't see themselves celebrated and represented?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really deep question how that works. And I mean, all I can share is just my own sense of having looked at that within myself. And other people may have their own different experiences of it. But what I have noticed is that when I have looked at, um, my own feelings of, so for me, one way imposter syndrome shows up is feeling small or insignificant, and or intimidated, right? And I am in all of those, I am comparing myself to an image, right? And it's an image I've internalized of um, what. So in the context of being a leader, what a leader looks like, And when I check that out, it's, I remember many years ago, I always had the sense of leaders being very tall, like they had to be tall, right? And um, I think I picked that up from just many, many years of having that image be, and I internalize the image. But once I realize it's an image that I've internalized, I can start to let it go, look for other images, realizing it's all just made up order. It's a lie. It's some of it is made up and some of it is just it's just an out and out lie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, yeah. So I think that that feeling of I don't really belong here. Somebody once said something to me many years ago when I was in a really vulnerable place, and they said, just by virtue of being born, like belonging is your birthright. And that just feels very true on a fundamental level. It's kind of, you can't really argue with it. I'm here, aren't I? Right.
Yeah.
And so the idea that there's criteria for belonging that I don't measure up, well, those are the images around who belongs that are held in the collective consciousness that we all internalize to some degree. And one way of getting more free from that is looking at that inside. Anytime you feel small or you don't fit in, just looking at that image.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I have a friend from the non-dominant culture who wears a veil, and uh, she occasionally goes outside without it, and she's like, wow, it's like night and day how people treat me. And I think what a lot of dominant culture folks don't understand is how othering it can be to exist in a body that isn't white in American culture, because of all the images around that show this is who a leader is, this is who gets to be in charge. So
yes. And that's hard to deal with, whether you feel shame or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you can feel fully, in love with yourself. But then you come to face with somebody who has in their mind an image of who belongs and who doesn't, and you don't fit it. And so something comes out of their mouth to make that clear. And it's easier to deal with if you don't feel the shame, but it's still there.
Oh yeah.
It's in the collective conscious,
It is. I mean, it can be a simple question like, where are you from? That's telling someone they don't belong.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I really appreciate that perspective. And you're actually reminding me of the book Collecting Courage that came out last year with Inika Allen and some other folks from Canada talking about, similar experiences to the ones that you're describing. Somebody being like, oh, we wanted to hire you, but then this person looked more like a leader, like literally saying that. And it was a tall white. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
No, it's in the book. It made me cry. It gave me goosebumps. If people go to collectingcourage.org, they can see a playlist, but definitely buy the book. They're coming out with a new workbook for it this year, which we're going to do an event around in November, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, this is a problem that is extremely blatant. It can be just straight up what people say, and as well as what they do. So for organizations that want to do better with this, just it sounds like what you're saying is it's not a quick fix. It's something that's endemic, and that you shouldn't push on individuals. You should look at what in our structure, what in how we run an organization is not inclusive. It's not about belonging, and it's not about, helping.
I think, yeah. I think that I think we can work both, well, all sides of the issue. I think we don't need to push individuals, but we do need to support them. Right. And because it can be genuinely hard to exist in these spaces, right? And we love our nonprofit. I love our nonprofit leaders. I think that they're doing important work. Like almost all of my clients are women or people of color or both. And I really believe in what they're trying to do. And I think they deserve support and need it. And so I think we support the individuals, but we also, but the support of the individuals is in service of finding collective solutions. Right. Because you can't do I think it is hard to do one without the other. Because if you're trying to make changes on a systemic level, who's making that change?
Right.
Right. People who are afraid to name the problem that they might be blamed. Um, either because they're in a dominant position and they're trying to protect themselves, or because they have imposter syndrome, or for whatever reason. Nobody wants to carry all that. So how do we work together, and what kind of leadership capacities do we need in order to do that? To kind of look at it from both sides, I think.
So that's why people should hire you to figure that out, is what you're saying, right? Because I think you'd be great at it. Like, I'm just saying. Pitch yourself,
Thanks.
pitch your stuff right now. Come on, we live under capitalism. Tell us how to hire you and where to find you and the stuff you have coming up.
Sure. Thank you. It's very nice of you. I am pretty good at it, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if people want to hear me talk more about this, I'm going to be at the Alliance Center online in a virtual. I'll be doing a virtual workshop at the Alliance Center in Denver on the 26th of September. I don't know if this podcast will be out in time for that, or I will be, both you and I will be at the Montana Nonprofit Association virtual conference. I'll be there on the 26th. It's a 2-day, 22nd. It's a 2-day conference. And then I have, if folks want more individual support, I have a freebie I offer. So I have a process that I walk people through that I call impact mapping, where you can, I can help you quickly locate where you're stuck, start to find a way forward. If imposter syndrome is one of the very common ways that people get stuck. And I've noticed some patterns around how that happens and what tends to work. So because of that, I can often help. We can often get a lot done in that 30 minutes. So if you're a nonprofit leader and you're not having the impact you wish you could have, you can sign up for one of those free sessions at greatergoodcoaching.org/map-your-impact.
And we'll have that in the show notes as well, greatergoodcoaching.org/match your impact. Map your impact. Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah.
This has been a very enlightening conversation, and I really, really appreciate you, Reva, for coming on. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.